I have been terrified of getting in trouble ever since I was a little girl. So much so that my kindergarten teacher, on the last day of the school year, called my mom over and told her that her one goal for me for the rest of my school career was to get in trouble, at least once. It took me a really long time to realize that goal. And it wasn't for lack of opportunity. Amongst my classmates, finding new and interesting ways of getting in trouble was the #1 pastime. Some trouble was inadvertent, like the boy who brought a fake grenade to school as part of a Halloween costume and ended up getting us all evacuated. Some trouble was definitely on purpose, like the girl who made it her personal mission to stab every single member of the student body with a pushpin in 1 week. The best trouble was a collective effort, like when my graduating class became the first to successfully sell the high school on Craigslist. My moment of glory came in the 8th grade. In 8th grade, I won't say that I sat at the weirdo lunch table, but we were quirky. We were so quirky, in fact, that the rest of the weirdo lunch table banished us to the far corner so that we wouldn't interrupt their tween-age gossip sessions with our attempts to perfect our fruit-by-the-foot lasso technique. There was Eliza, the daughter of lawyers and self-proclaimed leader of the group. There was Kyla, the quiet and mysterious new girl. There was Lexi, who ate chocolate-frosted sugar bombs for breakfast every morning and was on a perpetual sugar rush. And there was me. I was the lucky one who got to sit with my back up against the big, beige, old-fashioned water fountain, which spewed more mildew than water. I was also notable in that I always brought the exact same thing for lunch every day. When I was 5, I invented the copyrighted Fiona Maxwell ham and olive sandwich and proceeded to eat one every single day of my life until, in the 8th grade, a fateful trip to the grocery store would change the trajectory of my life and that of my friends. While my mom stocked up on the usual provisions, my eyes wandered over to a barrel full of what looked like little red gems. They were perfectly round cheeses covered in soft red wax. I knew from the moment I laid eyes on them that I had to have them. The era of the ham and olive sandwich was over. The following day, I brought 2 Baby Bell Bon Bell cheeses in my lunchbox. I unwrapped the plastic wrapping, pulled off the wax pull tab, opened the wax, took out the cheese, and that was when I realized that the remaining wax looked exactly like a bright red Pac-Man. And if you scraped off the extra wax from the wax pull tab, you could fashion little round eyes and sharp, pointy teeth. And thus, the first Baby Bell wax vampire Pac-Man was born. Lexi had been looking over my shoulder and immediately demanded that I make one for her as well. We spent the rest of the lunch period staging epic battles and dramatic death scenes until the lunch ladies began to push the giant trash cans through the aisles. And I realized that I didn't want to throw away my creations with the rest of the garbage. So I looked for a place to house the little critters. And my eyes landed on a little patch of wall in between the top of the table and the bottom of an old, rotting wooden windowsill. I pressed the wax into the wall, and there the Pac-Man stayed to wait and play another day. This pattern continued for months. Every day I brought 2 Baby Bell cheeses in my lunch, and every day 2 new Baby Bell wax vampire Pac-Men joined the regimen. Soon they covered not only that little patch of wall, but they bled onto the top of the table and crept onto the old rotting wooden windowsill and onto the grimy window pane, and they covered an entire face of the big, beige, water fountain. My school must have been suffering from a major custodial staffing shortage to have missed an infestation of that magnitude. Meanwhile, when I was in the 8th grade, my middle school acquired a new assistant principal. Her name was Miss Apostolus, but we called her Miss Apocalypse. She knew how to run a tight ship. Her first order of business was to reform recess, because allowing 250 13-year-olds to stand around a field plotting who knows what was far too dangerous. From now on, during the last 10 minutes of the lunch period, all the kids would line up single file at the back door, march once around the perimeter of the school, and come back in. And that was recess. This provoked wide-scale revolt, culminating in a giant food fight that nearly got the 8th grade's Springfield field trip privileges revoked. The day after the food fight, Miss Apocalypse made it her personal duty to oversee the lunchroom. On day 1 of the new regime, I trotted into the lunchroom, innocent as always, sat with my back up against the big beige old-fashioned water fountain, ate my cheese. Lexi and I made our Pac-Man, had our fun, and just as we were contemplating the day's march around the school, I looked for a place to house the newest recruits. Housing was getting dreadfully scarce. But finally, Lexi spotted a little empty patch of window in the very tippy-top corner. At that moment, a shadow passed over the lunch table. Kyla said, "Eep!" and hid under the table. Eliza threw herself to the end of the table to have nothing to do with us. And there was Lexi pressing wax into glass with Miss Apocalypse bearing down over her, and she said, "Go to the wall." Because at my school, if you got in trouble during lunch, you had to stand at the wall of shame in front of the a la carte line. And while everyone else marched around the school, you had to clean up the lunchroom. Shaking, Lexi scurried over to the wall of shame, where she tried to make herself invisible, as 250 curious pairs of eyes swept over to look at her for about 30 seconds, and then went back to whatever else they were doing. Pretty soon, everyone else lined up at the door, but I stayed rooted to the spot. I felt sick. It was my cheese that had caused all this misery. The Baby Bell Wax vampire Pac-Men were my evil invention. And it was my brilliant idea to stick them against the wall. I knew what I had to do. I had to get myself in trouble. I stood up and walked slowly over to the wall of shame, where I stood next to Lexi. And together, we scraped every single one of the Baby Bell Wax vampire Pac-Men off the wall, off the table, off the windowsill, off the window pane, and off the big, beige, old-fashioned water fountain. Some had turned green with mold. Others melted red splotches into the surfaces. But with a couple of trusty a la carte line forks, we managed to erase most traces of the invasion. That day, I realized that there are worse things in the world than getting in trouble, and it's important to stand by your friends. Which is why, the following afternoon, Lexi and I started the 2nd regimen of the Baby Bell Wax vampire Pac-Men in my gym locker. Thank you. was a sweltering July day on the streets of Chicago's 17th Ward. One by one, 11 boys tumbled up the front walk of the Chicago Commons Settlement House. The settlement workers had arranged for each boy to escape the city heat for a couple of weeks by staying with a farm family. By 3 o'clock, all had left with their hosts, except one. Little Jimmy McGuire was the last to arrive. Red-haired and freckled from head to toe, little Jimmy scrambled around the corner at 3:15. "Jimmy," Graham Taylor, the settlement's head worker, exclaimed. He had just been telling Josephine, Jimmy's farm hostess, that the small boys of the neighborhood were the settlement's biggest problem. "Sorry I'm late. Me mom said she wasn't going to let me come, seeing as I just spilled a whole pan of milk she'd been boiling for little Eileen. But finally, she relented, seeing as by sending me away, she'd be getting me out of her hair for a couple of weeks and all." Jimmy was astounded by the streetcar ride. He'd been on streetcars before, of course. His gang often flipped cars, meaning they would hop aboard without paying the fare and hop off again whenever it pleased them. But this time, the streetcar took him all the way to the end of the line, where he and Josephine were met by a man in a coach who took them all the way to the end of the earth. When they arrived, Josephine introduced Jimmy to Samuel, her husband, and the three sat down to an ample supper. During Jimmy's third helping of apple pie, the excitement of the day caught up with him, and he drifted gently off to sleep. His head drifted, not so gently, onto a plate full of crust and sticky apple filling, with a squelch and a thud. The following morning, Samuel showed Jimmy the daily round of chores. Jimmy milked the cows so enthusiastically that the herd was not altogether pleased with this latest addition to the workforce. Samuel decided that removing the eggs from the chicken coop was a bit too meticulous, so he invited Jimmy to chase the chickens through the fields while he collected the eggs. By noon, the hens were just as indignant as the cows. Jimmy was too small to help with the field work, so Josephine suggested he take a swim. He plunged into the creek and paddled about for a while. But splashing was only fun to a point. Since he didn't have anyone to splash. There was no denying it. Jimmy was homesick. Back in Chicago, between his 7 siblings and his gang, between the tenement and the school and the settlement and the street, Jimmy was never alone for a minute. Tears would come, and even though no one was around to see them, Jimmy held them in. James T. McGuire Jr. would never be caught dead crying like a baby. It was bad enough when the homesickness hit him in the daytime, but after dark, the dark was darker than Jimmy ever imagined dark could be. In Chicago, the dark was always crowded out by electric lights. And the sounds. Chicago was noisy, of course, but it was a comforting, all-encompassing sort of noise. Wheels creaking, horses clopping, the far-off clang of factory machinery, neighbors shouting at each other in the next room, children galloping up and down the tenement stairs. The country was silent. An eerie sort of silence that wasn't actually silent. An odd, repetitive, chirping sound sent chills down Jimmy's spine. "There's something out there," he informed Josephine. "Do you mean the crickets, dear?" "Crickies?" Jimmy shuddered from head to toe. The night was the last straw. Jimmy went to bed and tried to fall asleep. But the crickies started the second act of their nightly concert. And this time, they had an accompanist. Ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Jimmy knew he had heard that sound before, once in school, Teach had brought in a couple of big, warty bullfrogs from nature study. These were more high-pitched. But that just conjured up images of tiny frogs living in the trees, swooping through his window, attacking him while he was sleeping, crawling into his ears, his nose, his mouth. The following morning, Jimmy had deep purple bags under his eyes, and his red hair stuck up at every angle. Josephine and Samuel had a vague sense that something was wrong, but both had lots of chores to do, and any sense of foreboding was quickly dashed from their minds. Jimmy, meanwhile, had a plan. He didn't just spend the night shaking in abject, mindless terror. No. He had formulated his escape. While his hosts were hard at work, he packed his suitcase and, without even saying goodbye to the chickens or the cows, who were more than happy to see the back of him, he began the long tramp home. 3 days later, back in Chicago, Graham Taylor froze in his tracks. He was walking back from Hull House, where he'd been telling all the other Chicago settlement workers about the successful summer outing work done by Chicago Commons. But there, right in the middle of Milwaukee Avenue, getting booted off a streetcar with a pile of other boys by an irate conductor, was Jimmy McGuire. Little Jimmy, who Graham had just named as one of the beneficiaries of the settlement's summertime philanthropy. Jimmy! Jimmy's eyes widened, and the other boys scattered to the winds. Oh, hiya, Mr. Taylor, sir. I thought you were with the Morrisons. I come home. Why? Well, there weren't no kids there. You knew that when you left. Didn't you like the place? Oh, yes, it was a lovely place. The finest that ever happened. And they was good to me, too. And I had fun milking and chasing the chickens and going and swimming. Say, I could have stayed there for a long time, if it had stayed light. But the nights was terrible. Say, it was awful dark. I never seen so much dark all at once in me life. And then the creaky sang all night. And some kind of frogs, tree frogs they called them, hollered out of the dark at a feller, and I just couldn't stand it. I just had died, that's all, if I'd have stayed there another minute. So I come home, where there were some kids, and electric lights, and things weren't so lonesome. Hey, Jimmy, the gang called from across the street, pointing at an oncoming streetcar. Now's our chance. Jimmy looked from Graham to the gang. He gushed out, "See ya, sir," and hurried off after his friends. Graham watched as the boys hopped onto the back of the streetcar and nestled inconspicuously behind a crowd of paying passengers. There must be some way of solving the big problem of the small boy. Miss Lark lived next door. But before we go any further, I must tell you what next door looked like. It was a very grand house, the grandest in Cherry Tree Lane. It had 2 gates, one for Miss Lark's friends and relations, and the other for the butcher and the baker and the milkman. Jane and Michael always knew when Miss Lark was out in the garden or coming along the lane because she wore so many brooches and necklaces and earrings that she jingled and jangled just like a brass band. All day long, no matter where the children were, they could hear Miss Lark calling in a very loud voice, things like, "Andrew, where are you? Andrew, you mustn't go out without your overcoat. Andrew, come to Mother." And if you didn't know, you might think that Andrew was a little boy. Indeed, Jane thought that Miss Lark thought that Andrew was a little boy, but Andrew wasn't. He was a dog. One of those small, silky, fluffy dogs that looks like a fur necklet until they begin to bark. But of course, when they do that, you know that they're dogs. No fur necklet ever made a noise like that. Now, Andrew led such a luxurious life that you might have thought he was the Shah of Persia in disguise. He slept on a silk cushion in Miss Lark's room. He went by car to the hairdresser's twice a week to be shampooed. He had cream for every meal, and sometimes oysters. And he possessed 4 overcoats in checks and stripes in different colors. Andrew's ordinary days were filled with the kind of things that most people only have on birthdays. And when Andrew himself had a birthday, he had 2 candles on his cake for every year instead of only 1. The effect of all this was to make Andrew very much disliked in the neighborhood. People used to laugh heartily when they saw Andrew sitting up on the back seat of Miss Lark's car on his way to the hairdresser's with the fur rug spread across his knees and his best coat on. And on the day when Miss Lark bought Andrew 2 pairs of small leather boots so that he could go out in the park, wet or fine, everybody in the lane ran down to their front gates to watch them go by and to smile secretly behind their hands. "Pooh," said Michael one morning as he was watching Andrew through the fence. "Pooh, he's a nincompoop." "How do you know?" asked Jane, very interested. "I know because I heard Daddy call him one this morning." And Michael laughed very rudely at Andrew. "Ahem. He is not a nincompoop," said Mary Poppins. And that is that. And Mary Poppins was right. Andrew wasn't a nincompoop, as you will very soon see. Now, you mustn't think that Andrew did not respect Miss Lark. He did. He was even fond of her, in a mild sort of way. He couldn't help having a friendly feeling towards someone who had been so good to him ever since he was a puppy, even if she did kiss him rather too often. But there was no doubt about it. The life Andrew led bored him to distraction. He would have given half his fortune, if he had one, for a nice piece of raw red meat, instead of the usual breast of chicken or scrambled eggs with asparagus. For in his secret inner heart, Andrew longed to be a common dog. He never passed his pedigree, which hung on the wall of Miss Lark's drawing room, without a shudder of shame. And many a time he wished he never had a father, nor a grandfather, nor a great-grandfather, if Miss Lark was going to make such a fuss of it. It was this desire of his to be a common dog that led Andrew to choose common dogs for his friends. And whenever he got the chance, he would run down to the front gate and sit there watching for them, hoping to exchange a few common remarks. But, of course, just as the conversation would be getting good, Miss Lark would pop her head out of an upstairs window and cry, "Andrew, come inside. Come away from those dreadful street urchins." And Andrew would have to come in, or else Miss Lark would shame him by coming down and bringing him in. So he would blush and hurry up the steps so that his friends should not hear her calling him her precious, her joy, her little lump of sugar. Mwah! Andrew's most special friend was more than common. He was a mutt. He was half an Airedale, half a Retriever, and the worst half of both. Whenever there was a fight in the road, he would be sure to be in the thick of it. He was always getting into trouble with the postman and the policeman, and he loved nothing more than sniffing about in drains and garbage tins. He was, in fact, the talk of the whole street. Although one person had been heard to say thankfully they were glad he was not their dog. But Andrew loved him and was continually on the watch for him. Most often, they just had a chance for a quick sniff in the park. But on luckier occasions, though these were very rare, they would hold long talks at the gate. From his friend, Andrew heard all the town gossip, and you could tell from the rude way in which the other dog laughed as he told it that it wasn't very complimentary. But of course, Miss Lark would see them and cry out, and the other dog would get up, loll out his tongue at Miss Lark, wink at Andrew, and wander off, waving his hindquarters as he went, just to show that he didn't care. Andrew was never allowed outside the gate, not unless he went with Miss Lark for a walk in the park, or with one of the maids to have his toes manicured. Imagine then the surprise of Jane and Michael when they saw Andrew all alone, careering past them through the park, with his ears back and his tail up as though he were on the track of a tiger. "Hi, Andrew, where's your overcoat?" cried Michael, trying to adopt a high, windy voice like Miss Lark. "Andrew, you naughty little boy," said Jane, and her voice, because she was a girl, sounded a bit more like Miss Lark. Andrew just regarded them both very haughtily and barked sharply in the direction of Mary Poppins. "Ruff!" Let me see. I think it is the first on your right and the second house on the left-hand side. "Ruff! Ruff!" No garden, only a backyard. Gates usually open. "Ruff! Ruff! Ruff!" I'm not sure, but I should think so. It generally goes home at tea time. Andrew flung back his head and set off again at a gallop. Jane's eyes and Michael's were round as saucers in surprise. "What was he saying?" they both demanded breathlessly together. "Just passing the time of day," said Mary Poppins, and she shut her mouth tightly as though she did not intend any more words to escape from it. "He wasn't," said Michael. "He can't have been," said Jane. "Well, you know best, of course, as usual." "He must have been asking you where somebody lived. I'm sure he must," persisted Michael. "Well, if you know, why bother to ask me? I'm no dictionary." "Oh, Michael," Jane scolded. She'll never tell us if you talk like that. Mary Poppins, do tell us what Andrew was saying to you, please. Ask him. He knows, Mr. Know-It-All. Oh, no, I don't, Mary Poppins. I promise I don't. Do tell. 3:30. Tea time. Mary Poppins shut her mouth as though it were a trap door. She did not say another word all the way home. Jane fell behind with Michael. It's your fault. Now we'll never know. I don't care, said Michael, and began to push the scooter very quickly. I don't want to know. But he did want to know, very badly indeed. And as it turned out, he and Jane and everyone else knew all about it before tea time. Just as Mary Poppins and the children were crossing the road to their own house, they heard loud cries coming from next door. And there they saw a curious sight. Miss Lark's 2 maids were rushing wildly about the garden, looking under bushes and up into trees, as people do who have lost their most valuable possession. Miss Lark herself was racing about, waving her arms and crying, Andrew, Andrew! Oh, he's lost, he's lost! My darling boy is lost! Send for the police! I must see the Prime Minister. Andrew is lost. Oh dear, oh dear. Oh, poor Miss Lark. Jane couldn't help feeling sorry because Miss Lark looked so upset. But it was Michael who really comforted Miss Lark. Why, there's Andrew, Miss Lark. Just down there, just turning the corner. Where, show me. Miss Lark peered in the direction in which Michael was pointing. And there, sure enough, was Andrew, walking as slowly and as casually as though nothing in the world was the matter. And beside him waltzed half an Airedale, half a Retriever, and the worst half of both. The 2 dogs marched sedately up to the group, whisking their tails jauntily and keeping their ears well cocked. And you could tell from the look in Andrew's eye that whatever he meant business. That dreadful dog. Miss Lark looked at Andrew's companion. Shoo, shoo, go home. The other dog just sat down on the pavement, scratched his right ear with his left leg, and yawned. Go away, go home. Shoo, I say. And as for you, Andrew, come indoors this minute. Going out like that, all alone and without your overcoat? I am very displeased with you. Andrew barked lazily, ruff, but did not move. He says, put in Mary Poppins, that he's not coming in. And how do you know what my dog says, may I ask? Of course he will come in. Andrew, however, merely shook his head and gave 1 or 2 low growls. He won't, said Mary Poppins, not unless his friend comes too. Stuff and nonsense, as if I could have a great hulking mutt like that inside my gate. He says he means it, and what's more, he says that he shall go and live with his friend, unless his friend is allowed to come and live with him. Oh, Andrew, how could you? After all I've done for you and everything. Miss Lark was nearly weeping. Andrew turned away. The other dog got up. Oh, he does mean it. I see he does. He is going away. Very well, Andrew. I give in. This other dog can stay on condition, of course, that he sleep in the coal cellar. He insists, ma'am, that won't do. His friend must have a silk cushion, just like his, and sleep in your room too. Otherwise, he shall go and sleep in the coal cellar with his friend. Oh, Andrew, I shall never consent to such a thing. Andrew looked as though he were preparing to depart. So did the other dog. Oh, he's leaving me! Very well, Andrew. It shall be as you wish. But I shall never be the same again. Never. Never. Such a common dog. I should never have thought it of you, Andrew. But I shall say no more, no matter what I think. And I shall call this creature waif, or stray, or ruff, 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 ruff. At that, the other dog looked at Miss Lark very indignantly, and Andrew barked loudly. They say, you must call him Willoughby, put in Mary Poppins. Willoughby being his name. Willoughby. Worse and worse. Ruff, 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 ruff. What is he saying now? He says that if he is to come home, you ought to never make him wear overcoats or go to the hairdresser's again. That is his last word. Very well. But I'm warning you, Andrew. If you catch your death of cold, don't blame me. And with that, Miss Lark marched haughtily up the steps, sniffing away the last of her tears. Andrew cocked his head towards Willoughby as if to say, come on, and the two dogs walked slowly up the garden path, waving their tails like banners, and followed Miss Lark into the house. Andrew isn't a nicky-poop after all, you see, Jane told Michael as the children hurried up the stairs to the nursery and tea. No, agreed Michael. But how do you think Mary Poppins knew? I don't know, said Jane, but she will never, never tell us. I'm sure of that. Platero is a small donkey, a soft, furry donkey, so soft to the touch that he might be said to be made of cotton, with no bones. Only the jet mirrors of his eyes are hard like two black crystal scarabs. I turn him loose, and he goes to the meadow, and with his nose he caresses the little flowers of rose and gold and blue. I call him softly, Platero. And he comes to me at a gay little trot that is like laughter of a vague, idyllic, tinkling sound. He eats whatever I give him. He likes mandarin oranges, amber-hued muscatel grapes, purple figs tripped with crystalline drops of honey. He is as loving and tender as a child, but strong and sturdy as a rock. When, on Sundays, I ride him through the lanes in the outskirts of the town, slow-moving countrymen, dressed in their Sunday clean. Watch him a while, speculatively. He is like steel, they say. Steel, yes. Steel and moon silver at the same time. We understand each other. I let him go at his fancy, and he always takes me where I want to go. Platero knows that on reaching the Corona pine, I like to get close to its trunk and touch it, and to look up at the sky through its enormous, light-filtered top. He knows that the narrow path that leads between grass plots to the old fountain delights me, that it is high festival for me to watch the river from the Pine Hill, which, like a sorceress, brings classic scenes before me. If I go to sleep, unafraid, on his back, my awakening always finds me at one of these friendly spots. I treat Platero as if he were a child. If the road is rough or a little too hard for him, I get down to make it easy for him. I kiss him. I tease him mercilessly. He knows that I love him and bears me no grudge. He is so like me, so different from the rest, that I have come to believe that he dreams my own dreams.